The call that mom died was soul-crushing. Her Alzheimer's had gotten pretty bad and, apparently, she walked off into the woods one night and never returned. They still haven't recovered her body, but the consensus is that she's not coming back. The search went on for a month before we started planning the memorial service. But you don't need to hear about that. It's the effects of her death that matter. Now, obviously I'm devastated over it, but I wasn't as close with my parents as I should have been. I mean that in both the relationship sense and the physical sense. They sent me to live with my Aunt Bryn when I was around 7 years old. At the time I didn't know it was going to be a permanent thing, it was all so sudden. One day I was living a quiet life in the middle of nowhere with my parents. The next I was with Bryn in the crowded city. I'd only met her a handful of times before then, so that mixed with the culture shock of my new surroundings was uncomfortable to say the least. They wanted me to get a proper education at a good school, but I don't know why they couldn't have prepared me a little better. It's not like they didn't care. They visited as often as they could and called me every day. Jesus, I keep ranting. Anyways, mom's death pretty much broke my dad. They'd been married since 18 and I've never seen any two people more in love. I was mad on their behalf when the police investigated my dad to check if he had any involvement in whatever happened to her. Obviously, they didn't find anything on him. Dad was so quiet after that. We couldn't get a hold of him over the phone, so me and Bryn had to drive for hours to visit. Even then, it took him a while to answer the door and he was pretty unresponsive when we tried to talk. He just stared into nothing with a distant expression. His black hair was almost completely gray. Clearly he was distraught. So Bryn and I decided that being isolated in that tiny house wasn't good for him. He didn't have much to say when we suggested he move to the city. From the little we got out of him, it seemed like he was both pained and attached to the memories the house brought him. I have to say, being back brought a sense of nostalgia. I remember running around in the yard, cutting firewood with my dad, cooking with mom anyways. His health was worsening and he couldn't stay there. And, unfortunately, he was starting to show signs of dementia as well. I'm guessing it was caused by her death, but I'm not a therapist. Eventually, after a month or two, we got him to agree. As fate would have it, the lease on my apartment was almost up. One thing led to another and there I was, moving back into my childhood home. The timing was good and someone needed to take care of the place while dad was gone. Plus, I've always been a fan of nature and it was so much quieter in the woods. Even at night, I couldn't hear crickets chirping. Absolute silence. The biggest downside at the time was that if I needed to buy or do something, I'd have to drive about 30 minutes over to the town nearby. But it was worth it. I felt closer to my mom and got to remember some of the things I'd forgotten. Like, there were still marks on the kitchen doorway where she measured my height, and where I'd carved a drawing of me and my imaginary friend on the back of the shed. Everything was great for a while. But then I saw it. 2 months in. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was just walking outside when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was being watched. As I turned around, I noticed something on the road. Before I could get a good look at it, it ran off into the woods. I went back inside for a while because I was scared it was a black bear or some other animal. But, I didn't see anything for a few months after that. I'd pretty much forgotten about it until it ran in front of my car as I was driving home. My heart practically leapt out of my chest as it raced onto the road just a few feet ahead of me. I slammed the brakes and swerved the car, scared at first that it was someone's dog. The tires screeched across the road and the car tilted slightly as it pulled to a jolting stop. I hadn't heard or felt anything collide with the car, but I still grabbed my flashlight out of the glove box and opened the car door. Despite the warm weather, a chill ran up my spine when I heard it scamper away. That definitely didn't sound like a dog's feet against the pavement. It was pretty quiet, but the steps of its paws were uneven and soft, so it didn't have hooves or long nails. Regardless, I stepped out of my car and shone the light around. No blood anywhere, no animal to be seen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again and I glanced into the silent forest. I couldn't hear anything walking around, which was an issue since the animal was just there and it only moved what sounded like a couple of feet. As far as I could see, it had disappeared. Needless to say, I was a bit unnerved when I got home that night. I wondered for hours what the animal might have been and where it could have gone. I thought about it over and over, picturing what I'd seen. It didn't exactly look like a dog, I realized. Its back was arched and its legs were too long and bent at the wrong angle. But I summed it up to the bad lighting and panic of the situation. I saw it more often after that. Something would move on the side of the road occasionally, then more frequently. Never once was I able to see it clearly or long enough to tell what it was. But it was certainly starting to scare me. Sometimes it was shorter and sometimes it was taller. Of course, I couldn't be sure that it was the same animal every time, but I didn't see animals very often. Even then, they were usually birds. Also, I kind of had a feeling. A horrible, sickly and dreadful feeling that I can't really compare to any other. Whatever this animal was, it was horrible. Adding to the horror of the situation was the fact that people's pets were starting to go missing. Cats, dogs, even a bird at one point. Missing pet posters were popping up everywhere, both on trees near the road and even in town. I spent less and less time at the house, choosing to go to the town's cafe instead. The town was pretty small, a place you'd drive past and forget about almost immediately. I had a few vague memories of heading into town. Once watching a movie with my parents in the small one-screen theater. Waiting at the mechanic with my dad until our car was fixed. Waiting again as my mom used the payphone to call someone. And I remembered begging my mom to buy me and my imaginary friend each a cookie at the cafe. It was pretty empty in the cafe, just as I remembered. I sat down at the same booth I always sat at, the same one that me and my mom sat at 18 years ago. The table's corner was chipped and the seat across from me had a small tear on it, revealing the stuffing inside. I took a deep breath, getting a whiff of the coffee being brewed behind the counter, as I put down my laptop. I was just about to open it when I saw the missing poster for Mittens, a tabby cat I've seen on the side of the road before. It made me think of the animal I kept seeing. Was it killing these pets? There had to be some reason they were suddenly disappearing.